Hello again everyone and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Until Update for September 7th through the 13th, 2025. It would be an understatement to say that this week has been quite rough for all, so what I had planned to talk about will have to wait until next week. I'll cover the general events here in just a second, but today we're going to spend most of the time talking about some of the investigative efforts regarding the assassination of Charlie Kirk, as you guys might expect. I'm not going to show anything graphic or anything like that, but we are going to take a look at some of the details and sequence of events so that we can have a better, well-rounded picture of what happened, and hopefully we can glean something from this and prevent this sort of horror from happening again. So, before we get into that, I did want to acknowledge that this is not the only significant event that has taken place this week. We, of course, had the surfacing of footage of the horrific murder of Irina Zarutska a few weeks ago now. That gut punch came out shortly before the Charlie Kirk shooting, so it's been kind of a double whammy this week. A lot to process, a lot to think about, a lot of lessons to learn, and we'll get to that in due time. And things in the political sphere have changed quite a bit internationally over the past few days as well. We have the Unite the Kingdom events, which have drawn several million people throughout the British Isles this morning, which are currently underway as I'm recording this. The French government has collapsed with a new prime minister being selected, and of course the same thing happened in Japan. Their prime minister resigned as well this week. And we also have tensions continuing in the Middle East in the form of multiple undersea cables being cut in the Red Sea. Most of these events I have already covered, or I will plan to cover on Monday in greater depth. I know that most Americans have been kind of focused on one event this week, so that's what we'll talk about here next. So, as nearly all of you have heard, the political commentator Charlie Kirk was assassinated at a college event in Utah a few days ago. The general overview of the story is that he was shot at a Turning Point USA-style debate at Utah Valley University in Orem, just south of Salt Lake City. Right after the shot was fired, the shooter was able to egress from the area due to the fray from the shooting, but also due to several individuals acting suspiciously or taking credit for being the shooter in the crowd, which afforded the real shooter time to egress from the area. Whether that's intentional or not, we'll get into in a bit. But in either case, the shooter was able to evade capture for a couple of days before eventually being discovered, questioned, and detained by his family about 3.5 hours south of the shooting site, and he was eventually turned in to authorities shortly thereafter. As far as the investigation goes, linking this individual who was detained to the shooting scene, the authorities have stated that he was detained wearing the same clothing as observed in the surveillance footage that they provided, and they state that they interviewed his roommate, which is an important detail we'll get into in a moment, but they stated that they interviewed his roommate who showed the investigators messages on Discord, which involved the shooter actually talking about some of the phrases and carvings, engravings that were made on the bullets themselves. So that's the most definitive link that this is the individual who conducted the shooting. As of right now, that is the general story of how things have transpired so far. There are a few minor details that have changed somewhat over the media coverage of this horrific incident. There is a lot of speculation on a lot of different things, and today we are going to dig into some of the inconsistencies and details that don't necessarily add up regarding this horrific murder. Now, let me state right up front that I know that it is so easy to be contrarian. It is so incredibly fashionable to nitpick and drag every single issue and detail down a rabbit hole, and I say that as one of those inclined to do just that. It is incredibly easy to convince people that everything is a psyop these days, and with so much genuine manipulation and gaslighting on the internet these days, I don't blame anyone one bit for thinking that basically everything is a lie, including most of the details in this story, right, in this case. But I am aware of how delicate this issue is, right? It's fresh in our minds. People are still in a state of shock. People are still in a state of grief, and I am very aware of what people are feeling right now. That is why I'm going to try to cover what we know and what we don't know and what we need to figure out in as respectful of a manner as possible. No, we are not going to go off on a wild goose chase or start ragging on the feds just because. My only goal today is to bring information to light that may help identify Charlie's killer and, equally as importantly, anyone else who might be involved. We all owe it to Charlie to do the best that we can to urge this investigation to be conducted properly, and that this investigation does not cut corners like all of the other high-profile political shootings so far. And right now I have very serious concerns that might be happening. So zooming in just a little bit to get a slightly closer view of the sequence of events. We have the alleged shooter's position on the roof of the Lossy Center or Lossy Center, which provides clear line of sight just around the roof of the Sorensen Student Center to where the debate tent was set up on the quad. This exact position also jives with the other eyewitness testimony in the form of a video, which one of the students took from the ground showing someone on the roof. That matches up with the geolocation of where this shooter's position was discovered by investigators after the shooting. Some of the other stronger evidence that indicates that this was a shooting position includes the security camera footage from the computer science building. The computer science building had a security camera, which you can see in the Google Street View of the parking lot, which was peeking out over the parking lot, and you can see the roof of the building where the shooter took the shot from. So if we take a look at the footage itself provided by the FBI, it's probably the highest resolution footage that we have received so far. And it does indicate the egress route taken by the shooter. So I've mapped that out as far as we can see. The footage picks up with the alleged shooter making his way north across the rooftop of the building before reaching the northeast corner, dropping to the ground and continuing to run north across the grassy area between the parking lot and the walking path there. And the footage stops or is cut off when he reaches the road. As far as I'm aware, as of this morning, Saturday morning, this is the only footage that we have of the suspect actually egressing from the area. So all of the other details regarding what happened after this have not been released to the public. So this is kind of what we've got to lean on for the most part. Now, just to address a minor discrepancy, or not really a discrepancy, but a clarification with this exact footage here. There are a lot of people that state that the shooter was not recorded on video. He absolutely was. There's no chance that he wasn't, because the FOV, the field of view for this shot, this imagery here, includes the firing position. So my personal guess is that the FBI started the footage after he's already run some distance away from where he took the shot, but guarantee the FBI has the footage of the shot being fired from this camera, if not others. So they're just not releasing it to the public, probably for obvious reasons. That's going to be a point of contention for a while. But again, this is a murder investigation, so my guess is that you're probably never going to see that footage. Either way, I just did want to address that in the evidence that the FBI has provided so far, the shooting position that they have designated themselves, that they have pointed out themselves, is in the field of view of the video they provided from the camera on the northwest corner of the computer sciences building. So that is a fact. Now, getting a little bit more down into the weeds, so far there are many details that do not explicitly add up regarding the murder of Charlie Kirk. Right now, there are a lot of wild theories circulating, not all of which are being conveyed in a manner that is respectful. Throwing out harebrained theories and baseless accusations is not usually helpful during a time of extreme grief, pain, and anger. However, if there are details that the FBI may have missed, we need to know, and we need to know right now. Every possible bit of consideration will be granted to allow for the leniency of details changing as the investigation continues and facts continue to be ironed out. However, in the interest of expediency and finding the real killer, some discrepancies need to be openly discussed. In short, a lot of mental gymnastics need to be conducted in order for the FBI's story to line up with their own evidence. I'll state right up front that the official sequence of events is certainly possible, right? It may be rare, it may be hard to believe, but it only had to line up one way, right? If it lined up another way, the shooting might not have happened. But in any case, in the interest of expediency, all possible details must be examined closely. The first bit of discrepancy and a little bit of criticism towards the FBI here is their handling of the surveillance footage. In short, they provided probably the most useless security footage to ever exist. Now, this security footage was adequate. Obviously, the killer's father probably saw it, or at least that's the story right now, is that he saw it and recognized his son from the security footage, and okay, happy ending, right? Well, as happy as one can be. However, if we look at how this was handled during the investigation, this is a point of learning for the FBI. They did not provide very clear shots of this individual's face. So this is the footage that they released. You can see that this is a stairwell camera, and the shooter would have looked directly at the camera as he's turning around the stairwell to go up to the next flight of stairs. They provided still images. They did not provide video. The video would have provided much needed context, and when you try to take a screenshot of a very low quality video to begin with, you get a lot of artifacting that the human eye cannot process or cannot make sense of. Just as a slight side note, human beings are apex predators, right? So we process information in a very unique way, right? We're always looking out for certain details, and we're able to recognize certain things in certain situations, but not others. What I'm trying to say is that the FBI providing these images was not very helpful. If they had provided a lower resolution video as opposed to still shots from that same video, it would have been a lot easier to recognize this individual. Human beings, because we are predators, right? We are, the top of the food chain here. We naturally want to pick out details when movement is involved. So if they had provided the image or the video of this guy walking up the stairwell as opposed to these still images, you could have censored the other people on the stairwell with black boxes or whatever. But if they provided the video, that would have been a lot better than providing still images where there's going to be artifacting. When the human eye looks at a video, our brains can process out that artifacting in the video a lot easier than if it were a still image and you've got to, start pixel peeping here. So that is just a point of improvement moving forward and something to remember for anyone out there who, is either the witness of a crime or is trying to look at surveillance footage or anything like that. This is a point of learning, right? But in any case, the FBI provided us these images which resulted in the suspect's capture. And while we're examining this footage, let's talk about some of the clothing discrepancies. So I should note that the FBI has not actually made a whole lot of statements themselves. Most of the FBI's information has been conveyed via Governor Cox, the governor of Utah, whereas the FBI investigators have not really been in front of the camera. FBI Director Kash Patel has been behind the podium speaking about this event, but most of what he has said so far has not really provided any details on the shooting. It's been about how great the FBI is in solving this case, which they didn't, as private citizens solved this case for them. So that is an important thing to remember because of what I'm about to talk about now, which is that you want your investigators, you want the people involved or someone involved or a PAO, if nothing else. You want someone involved who knows what they're talking about, giving details to the public if you don't want a public outcry. And here's what I mean by that. You can read or watch Governor Cox's statements himself, but he made comments regarding the change of clothing of the suspect. So, according to Governor Cox, the suspect was observed wearing his original clothing here, this American flag t-shirt, dark-colored hat, and jeans. So that was what he was originally observed going to the campus wearing. The statements from investigators are that he changed on the roof. So once he was in his shooting position on the roof of the building, he changed into a separate set of clothing or altered his appearance in some manner. What that means, we don't know. But he apparently changed his clothes. That's the official story right now. Furthermore, sometime after the shooting, according to Governor Cox, quote, at some point, the shooter transitioned back into his original clothing, the clothing that we see in this image here, which he was arrested wearing. So that is the official story as of right now. Now, one of the reasons why I've been so hard on the FBI regarding this case is because they have had plenty of time to congratulate themselves on their investigative prowess, yet they have not had time to clarify whether or not they actually have the actual shooter in custody. I will account for this when we get to the end. Okay, this may be wrong. Governor Cox may have been, telling tales out of school. He may have gotten details slightly wrong. Okay, we will account for that. To me, in the video footage, it doesn't necessarily look like he's wearing anything different. It looks like he's wearing the same clothing, but the official story by the feds, right? Their story is that in this video clip, the video clip of him egressing from the site, he is wearing different clothing than what he was arrested wearing. Do you see how we have to have a mental gymnastics of, well, he changed his clothes at some point? That's where we're starting to add in the first little pommel horse to our mental gymnastics display here. We'll go with this for now, okay? We'll go with this as the official story for now. This is the facts as the feds state that they are, but confidence is not high. It's one of those cases where there's not enough information or there's not enough detail there to disprove it, to disprove the official story, but there's enough there to cast doubt, especially when it comes to the details that we know right now. But again, we're probably going to be watching this video well into the future, right? So months or years down the line, this detail may have been addressed. Just putting that out there. The other detail that I have spent some time trying to nail down with not much success, I will admit, the other detail is the rifle itself. The FBI stated that the rifle that was used in the murder had been recovered from a wooded area. In the FBI's own footage of the killer's escape on the rooftop, it is not entirely certain whether or not he has the rifle at that point or not. There are some frames that appear to show him holding what we in the intel business call a long cylindrical object, or LCO. I would not feel confident saying either way whether or not this suspect had an LCO, had the rifle with him when he made his egress from the roof. It doesn't look like it. I will say that it doesn't look like it, but I will not slap a high confidence or even a moderate confidence on that. It's low confidence all the way around. So that's just what we have so far. If the FBI wants to produce another frame from another camera, we know that there were a lot of cameras on campus. If they want to provide another frame that shows he had the rifle in his hand, I'll take it, right? I'll happily concede that he did leave the roof with the rifle. So with regards to where the rifle was recovered, that is an unknown detail. We don't know the exact GPS coordinates of where that rifle was recovered from. We don't know if the suspect threw it off the roof and it just wasn't on camera. We don't know if the suspect carried the rifle with him or if he broke it down. Breaking down a Mauser M98 is not entirely a quick process, but I suppose it could be done. Not when you're trying to run for your life, right, to escape from the shooting scene. But either way, what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of inconsistencies here with regards to the event from the moment the shot was fired to when the suspect was arrested, right? There are gaps in the story, which is to be expected, but there are also details that are not entirely in line with what makes sense, right? So that is an unknown. The location of where the rifle was discovered. Was the rifle carried by the suspect off of the roof, or was it thrown off the roof? And where was the rifle actually recovered? What was the exact GPS coordinate of where it was found? Okay, that's a pretty big detail that we need to know. There were also people in the FBI's own footage walking around, watching this guy run away from the scene. If he had a rifle, even if it was wrapped up in a towel, like they state, or some kind of fabric covering, that's going to be something to question these people about. Did you happen to see this dude trying to run, a sprint away from this the shooting location with a gun barrel poking out somewhere? Because it does not seem like he made what we might in the business call a controlled exit. This dude was in flight mode, right? Absolutely moving as fast as possible with no consideration for evidence collection prevention, or any kind of concealment or anything. This dude was booking it, right? So you would think there would be some kind of evidence that kind of indicates where he dropped the rifle or where the rifle became separated from the shooter. So the point where the rifle transitioned out of the shooter's possession is a very critical point for what we'll talk about here in a moment. But for now, let's stick with the rifle and what I'm calling the magic scope. The magic scope here continues to be a point of discrepancy due to the alleged killer having clear photographs of himself shooting rifles on his social media pages. And these images show a clear measurement of his proper eye relief on display to the world. In short, this rifle, recovered at the scene as it was, would have been less than ideal for the shooter to have used it as it was configured. Considering that the shooter clearly had firearms experience, it is very unlikely that the shooter would have mounted the scope on this firearm this poorly. Anyone who has spent any sort of time whatsoever around any kind of ranged weapon like this would know that this scope is way too far back. You would not be able to see out of this scope very clearly at all. Is it impossible to use this way? No. Is it challenging? Yes. It is certainly possible for the FBI's version of events as released to the public to be true. This is why I've spent so much time trying to investigate this magic scope situation here, because it's important to understand and know when the rifle became separated from the shooter. This is a critical point of any investigation for any shooting, really. And it's important for a few different reasons, because this is one of those details, right? The murder weapon. This is a critical part of the investigation. This is one of the most significant pieces of evidence that this guy is the guy who conducted the shooting, right? The reason that I've taken an interest in this magic scope theory is that there are a couple of wildly different theories as to how this scope ended up in this configuration. Any investigator who looked at that rifle sitting in that box, photographed by the FBI agent's potato phone camera, should have seen that scope in the wrong position, so far to the rear that it does not make sense. So here are the four main theories that I can think of why this photograph exists. I'm very interested in why this one photograph exists. So the first theory is that the scope was properly mounted, right? It was forward where it should be, but it shifted into an improbable position during the escape. Either it got jostled or knocked or even disassembled by the shooter, if you want to believe that sequence of events. But it got changed in some way after the shooting was conducted. So it lost its zero and was jostled in some way to result in it being far to the rear, as discovered in this image. The second theory is that the scope was never really properly positioned and that the shooter took that shot with a very suboptimal sight picture. I say this theory is pretty unlikely due to the suspect having some knowledge of firearms. We have photographs, many photographs of him shooting firearms with a proper sight picture, properly extended stock to fit his shooting profile, right? So he knows what a proper sight picture is, and if he had shouldered this rifle, he would have immediately known the scope was in a wrong position, if this is how the shot was taken. So the second theory is possible. It's possible that this guy was an idiot and he just mounted his scope all wrong, and by the time that he went to go conduct the shooting, he somehow made that shot with only seeing a very, very compromised sight picture, or he was not properly shouldering the rifle. There's a bunch of different things that you can nest under theory 2 here. But the general theory is that it was never in the proper position. It was zeroed like this, and he somehow made the shot with it like this. The third theory is that he did make the shot with this scope in this position, but it wasn't his rifle. So that is the theory which is most interesting to me. Remember, the text messages indicated that this individual picked up the rifle from a drop point. Now, did he put that drop point together like investigators are insinuating, or did somebody else? Did this rifle belong to the shooter? We don't have these basic details. I've seen some information that suggests this rifle did not belong to the shooter and that it was illegally stolen or borrowed without the owner knowing about it. So that might explain why the scope was all jacked up and it didn't fit the shooter. If somebody else was less proficient with firearms than they might have mounted the scope in this manner, and that would have made sense, right, as to why this was the way that it was, and that the shooter recognized this, and that the shooter took the shot anyway, managing with a scope that was mounted and zeroed the best he could, right? So that's theory number 3. Personally, I think that theory is most likely, which is why I'm spending so much time talking about this investigation, because there may be other people involved here. The fourth theory, which is what I'll call the quote-unquote fringe theory, is that he never was the shooter. He never shot this rifle. This rifle was left for people to conveniently find, and that's that, right? So, classic case of big assassinations where the murder weapon, the alleged murder weapon, doesn't actually work, right? It's like finding a sniper's, rifle that was used to kill a certain person and there's no firing pin or something inside it, right? The classic quintessential impossible rifle situation. I don't know how much weight there is behind that theory. Is there ever any way to prove that at all? I don't know. I highly doubt that the FBI is going to do a ranged ballistic test with this rifle. I very highly doubt that. What they are probably going to do is fire one round and one round only in their ballistics chamber to get a slug to compare the rifling and do rifling analysis on the slug if the slug is recovered from the crime scene, which is for right now it has not been recovered. So I would be very curious as to see the FBI story is if you take this to a 200-yard range, can this rifle, as discovered at the crime scene, can this rifle even hit that target? Of course, you can always put a caveat on that, right? You can always say, look, the scope was damaged after it fell off the roof. All right, fine, but you've got to account for that, and so far they have not. Keep in mind that this magic scope theory here, this is the most gratuitous telling of events, right? This is giving every possible chance to the FBI for their own story to be correct, and it will be up for all of you to decide whether or not that is too much skewing to give them in their own favor. So either way, that's what I've got on the magic scope here. So that's it for the physical evidence recovered at the scene. Now, here is where I think the most suspicious part of the entire story comes out: the text messages. So the FBI, if we recall, recovered text messages or some kind of digital platform messages. They claim it was Discord, but we'll get to that. they recovered text messages between the shooter and the shooter's roommate. That is a point of discrepancy. The shooter lived at home with his family. To the best of my knowledge, he did not have a roommate. So who is this roommate? But that is what the FBI states, that he had a roommate, and this roommate was discussing the shooting with the killer to include the phrases that were engraved on the bullets that were recovered at the scene. To me, that is a pretty substantial bit of evidence that would turn the roommate into one of the lead suspects as being an accomplice. I'm just some guy on the internet, but that guy might be somebody to look into, because as far as what Governor Cox said, once again, you want the FBI making FBI statements, not the governor of a state, right? But as far as what Governor Cox stated, the FBI took out their phone during the interview and took photographs, like shaky cam, hand, stabilized photographs of the roommate's phone showing these images or showing these text messages. So I get it. That makes sense, right? For an investigator to do that during an interview, that's, what I personally would have done too. But the next step that probably would have been a wise move to take is to take out a plastic evidence baggie and seize that phone right then and there. Because you now have evidence, okay? You have probable cause that concerns life and death. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but this would seem to be a case that overrides the Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable search and seizure, right? Reasonable search and seizure is authorized, right? So again, I'm not sure if the FBI did that. It would have been wise for them to do so, but considering that the governor said they only took photographs of those Discord messages, I'm not entirely certain what the FBI did. And to be honest, there has been enough ridiculousness from the FBI in this case already to question the integrity of that. You would think the default is, well, of course they took photos at first and then they seized the digital records. Well, here's the thing. What is Discord's story this morning? Immediately, they said, oh yeah, we found the shooter's account. We know his username and have all the metadata for his account, but we didn't see anything incriminating. Who's to say they didn't just delete it? The digital forensics of this are always going to be questionable. Anytime the FBI is involved in anything to do with anything on the computer, any kind of digital evidence, it's just very sketchy, right? Especially considering that the FBI has routinely seized phones as evidence for the smallest possible crime. They've put people in holding cells for 48 hours without cause for the smallest possible crime, or even when there was no crime committed. Yet in this case, at least what Governor Cox says, is their field agents decided that it was the best course of action to take photos, not even screenshots, but actual camera photos of evidence that could not just blow the case wide open, but indicate that there are other people involved in a terrorist cell. Excuse me, but that is not exactly something that's quite comforting. Of course, I'm sure the FBI has got every possible excuse or explanation for all of that, and they just say, Governor Cox is wrong, we did seize the phone. But that's not what they said, and we have to go on what they said so far. So if there was at least one other person involved in the attack, as in the alleged roommate who was discussing the attack with the alleged killer, if there's one guy involved, there's a good chance that a third or even more were likewise involved too. As we have seen from the lunatics on the internet, the sometimes much beloved or much maligned schizo theorists on the internet, there have been a lot of people who have been identified in the Salt Lake City area, specifically cheering, celebrating, or even saying that they wish Charlie Kirk harm on the day of the attack. So your suspect list is not Tyler Robinson, period. Your suspect list is Tyler Robinson plus anybody else he was talking to online. And based on the engravings that were found on the bullets that the FBI has confirmed, 9 different times now, this dude was terminally online. This dude was consuming so much online brain rot content that it's very unlikely that he was communicating with just himself, right? It's very likely that he had a group of people that he told about the attack or helped him plan the attack, right? And I say that because very recently the FBI field office in Salt Lake City, so this exact office, has had its own set of personnel issues. The most recent agent in charge of this field office was Mehtab Syed, who was an immigrant from Pakistan that joined the FBI after 9/11. She was hired earlier this year in that role, but she was also rapidly fired after a few months with no real explanation, but allegedly due to incompetency. They've had big shakeups at this exact field office that's in charge of investigating this, right? So due to these developments, can we be blamed? Can the American people be blamed for doubting the integrity of the process in this exact place at this exact time? I don't think so. I think that there's pretty big integrity problems here. So all of that out of the way, right? All of these discrepancies out of the way. Let's balance this out a little bit here, and let's re-examine from a higher level. Are we just going down useless rabbit holes, or are we trying to get to the bottom of this case, right? So here are some normal things that seem suspicious right now, but could be explained later on, right? The general thoughts and general concerns that are pertinent to pretty much every investigation. The first thing to remember is that details change, okay? What is true right now might be false in just a couple hours, right? It may be false in just 5 minutes too, right? So you can't look at a press conference from 2 days ago and compare it to a press conference from 3 days ago. Now you can to some degree if there are major changes in the story, right? But little tiny details here and there, these can be indicators of a much more significant problem. I've tried to highlight some of those today, but they can also be nothing. They can be easily explained away, right? The second thing to remember, again, high-level wavetop stuff, the second thing to remember is that investigators are normally very bad at public speaking, and they're not so great at conveying the details of their investigation to the public. We have seen enough people in shirts with logos on them, standing behind a podium, talking and speaking not so correctly regarding their own case. I don't say that as an insulting manner, it's just a fact, okay? I get it. I would rather, an investigator be good at investigating rather than be good at public speaking and conveying details to the public. But in this case, it's important, right? Because this will lead to confusion and contradictory details, just like both Trump shootings, both assassination attempts on President Trump's life, and with this case, and with other high-profile assassinations or assassination attempts, even just around the world. The investigators are not so great at conveying these details to the public. And the reason why is this third point, which is that the priority is an investigation, not informing the public, right? Contrary to popular belief, the average user scrolling Twitter for updates on a story is not the first person that an investigator thinks about when they're trying to convey information to the public, right? Their job is to investigate the crime and get the killer and to get anybody who might be an accomplice, right? So their top priority is not you, right? Their top priority is not the public. Their top priority is the investigation, which is perfectly respectable. That's perfectly fine. But it also just means that we've got to glean things a lot of times, and we don't get a lot of help in explaining things, right? And the fourth factor to remember, which is probably the most important thing for everything I've said today, is that investigators routinely withhold critical evidence from public view. They're not giving you the whole story. They're not going to give you the tape that they have of the shooting. That's not going to happen. They're not going to explain why that scope was in that manner, and they're not going to give you the GPS coordinate of where that rifle was found. It's just not going to happen. If the killer is the killer that they say, okay, fine. We'll accept that for now. But what I don't accept personally is that this guy acted alone, and that is the current story. I don't think he acted alone. All of the evidence so far, even their own evidence, states that you have a suspect, the roommate. Like, you have a guy who has evidence of this guy communicating with other people, and there has been very little discussion of that, right? I get it. They're working through other things, but considering that they say, they start off a press conference, it was, we got him, all right? Well, yeah, you may have the shooter. I'll buy that, okay? The skeptic in me doesn't buy that, but I'll buy that for now. I'll give you that one. But what I won't give is the fact that you literally said you had a suspect that was an accomplice, that admitted to being an accomplice, and you're just going to let him walk, right? You're not going to say, look, we're investigating other leads. In a couple of weeks, it may turn out that was a trick, that they were actually investigating other people, and they wanted to keep any accomplices that they were tracking down, they wanted to keep them from running. Fair enough, all right? But right now, it doesn't necessarily look like it. It looks like they're rolling it up and they're putting a bow on it and calling it a day. The alleged killer confessing to the crime is going to halt most investigative efforts, and once they're looking for every possible excuse for this to be a lone gunman situation, right? That's what they're publicly insinuating. They may not be directly stating it, but they're insinuating. They are desperately trying for this to be just some, crazy leftist activists, and they're not really publicly interested, at least publicly again, interested in examining that this guy may have had help here, right? Once again, all of that considered, right? We're going to be as gracious as possible to the FBI, even though they never give that consideration to anybody else. We're going to give them that. We're going to give them the graciousness of their own story being true and most of the details that they have stated being true. And because of that, there are three main narratives that could be potentially possible, right? The first one is that every single detail in the official story is correct. Robinson conducted the shooting. Robinson acted alone, and every single detail, every single discrepancy that I have found and others have found, including some discrepancies that I have not mentioned yet, all of these discrepancies can easily be explained, and there is a neat little bow for every little possible detail. Okay, that's the story number one. Story number three is the exact opposite, right? The fringe position, as I'll call it, because I don't know what else to call it, right? The theory that Robinson was not the shooter, the rifle was staged, that the clothing debacle was actually because he didn't change clothes, it was a different person, right? The security camera footage didn't look like him, and the FBI conveniently has left out all the screenshots that show that fact, right? And that even if he was the shooter, he was the guy running off the roof, he was the guy who pulled the shot, and he did have in that rifle in his possession, that there are others who were involved to some degree. So that is what I'll call the fringe theory for now, because again, I don't have a better word for it. But the position that's in the middle, narrative 2 here, the plausible alternative to the official story, is that Robinson conducted the shooting, but he had help, right? Either he planned the attack with the help of other people, or he communicated with people before the attack, which is confirmed by the authorities' own statements on this, right? So their statement that he acted alone, yet he talked about the attack on Discord with other people, that is directly contradictory. And there is no way they can square that circle, right? They are lying one way or the other. Either he talked with other people about the attack, or he did not. And those people who he talked about the attack with knew about the attack. Therefore, in every court in the land, they would be an accomplice. They would be an accessory, if nothing else. And in terms of the magic scope, the rifle, right? He may have been the shooter, but it wasn't his rifle, right? It belonged to somebody else, and that additional person either knew or did not know how to mount a scope, and that can explain the magic scope theory away pretty easily. So those are the three main theories regarding the three main narratives, I should say, regarding what happened here. Now, I guess spending all this time talking about this is probably a farce, right? Because a personal confession to the murder, that's, hook, line, and sinker for the investigation. The suspect is alive, and, him confessing to the crime is going to halt most investigative efforts. So the details that are very contradictory right now, they're probably going to remain contradictory for a while, right? They've got their man. That's how they started the press conference. We got him, right? So because of that, the deductive reasoning that led this investigation and led to every bit of evidence along the way, that deductive reasoning is not going to transition to an inductive analysis of the facts that can't easily be explained. Details or facts or little details, right, that can't be explained, that last puzzle piece that will not fit in the puzzle, those pieces are just going to be set off to the side, and we're just going to look at an incomplete puzzle forever, right? That's how these investigative efforts work. That's just how the situation develops. Most of the discrepancies identified so far are the types of discrepancies that often arise with any criminal case. Like I mentioned before, right, there are going to be discrepancies. But here's the thing. It is the job of the professional, paid investigators with access to top-secret investigative tools to investigate these crimes. Why do you think Palantir has a $500 billion market cap, right? There's a reason for that. It is not up to us. It is not up to random volunteers on the internet with PowerPoint and some free time. This is not our job. The issue, and the whole point for talking about this, is that people like us cannot be certain that the skills of federal investigators are up to the task. Thus, the investigative efforts being undertaken all over social media, right? And the intense desire to ensure that not only this case is handled properly, but also that lessons are learned to ensure that the next killer does not evade capture as well. We owe it to Charlie to do this right? And we only have one chance to get it right. So closing today, on a more personal note, I guess, I would not consider myself to be one of Charlie's fans, as I'm not really involved in his sphere of influence or his politics or anything like that, but I am extremely angry about this murder myself. I am mostly angry at myself for not working hard enough to soften the blow of what was to come, such as days like this. I know there are a lot of people out there who have seen a lot of bad things in life, and you guys know that there are some things that society at large should not be witness to. It would be better, in my mind, at this point, if people were just to remain ignorant of the horrors of the world and the situation at hand, and if they would just let people like me handle it quietly, right, and let me have to wade through all of these horrific videos and all of these really bad things, right? I would really rather this not be aired on everyone's social media feed. Same thing with Irina Zarutska, right? Like these videos are very brutal, right? So half of me wants people to never see this kind of thing. People in polite society should never see this kind of thing. They should just leave it to people like me. And the other half of me is, no, they need to see it to understand how the situation is. And I think that my desire to not want people to see this kind of thing, that was a poor judgment call, it would seem. Because, most people have seen it now anyway. And most people are becoming aware of how dark things can get. Look, you can't look at the Charlie Kirk assassination video. You cannot look at the video of Irina and not be completely out of your depth. And people like me who have spent a decade, scrolling through LiveLeak and UVids in a professional manner to try to find these bad people like me could have done a better job at guiding these people through it. So I know there's a lot of people out there who says, don't avert your eyes from this situation. Look at these videos. That's up for you to decide. But I'm saying that if you're going to adopt that position, then you need to help talk these people through it. Because I've seen there are a lot of people in my own sphere who are not used to seeing these horrific things. And they need someone to talk them through it. You can't just throw it at them and say, look, you have to talk people through it. You have to help them understand what this means for the world and so on, right? You can't just be crass about it. There has to be decorum, there has to be respect, there has to be understanding, and there has to be a lot more delicacy with these kinds of things. People are not naturally inclined to look at this kind of thing. And those people like me who are used to seeing this kind of thing, we have to do what we can to help walk people through it. People in our own lives, we have to do what we can to walk our own people through it, right? There's going to be a lot of people. I know after the Arena video came out, I know that a lot of people showed these things to their families so that they could cement how serious the world is today. I get it. That is your call. I'm just saying be careful and do what you can. If you're gonna take that stance, it is your responsibility to make sure that it's done in a manner that is actually going to be helpful and not just psychologically damaging. So overall, right now, emotions are extremely high, probably on par or even higher than the day that President Trump himself was shot. Kirk's death has been shocking for reasons that many people might not even understand right now. I'm seeing a lot of people, and I guess I'm one of those people myself, who didn't really align with him on very much, but they are absolutely devastated by this. And I think they're devastated because of what this means. It's not just the death of one person, it's the death of moderation. It's the death of peaceful talking and peaceful solutions. That may or may not be true in time, but it sure does feel like it right now. So right now, while things are still fresh, the situation is still very raw for a lot of people. At this point, temperance, patience, and the pursuit of discernment are the best courses of action at this time. Nothing will be solved by knee-jerk reactions on either side of the political spectrum. Make no mistake, this is not about politics. This is a spiritual war more than anything else. This murder was a wake-up call for many. It was a wake-up call for conservatives who, upon seeing the outcry of support for the killer, might not have realized that the previous threats and rhetoric coming from a good portion of the far left, those arguments were not hyperbole. Those threats were not empty. Likewise, on the left, it was a wake-up call for many who might not have realized what their ideology truly stands for. And upon seeing the absolutely sickening behavior from some of the far-left individuals and politicians over the past couple of days, there are indeed many average people who are on the political left who have made the decision that this behavior from those on their own team is not what they stand for themselves. We have to remember that. If there were ever a time for grace to be afforded to those who, regardless of political beliefs, want to seek repentance and genuinely make an effort to stop this madness, now is the time for that discernment and grace to be applied. We should all be so fortunate to, upon our own death, receive the honor and respect that Charlie Kirk has received from even his most staunch adversaries and enemies. Everyone has a role to fill in this world, and it is the duty of those so capable to do what they can in order to ensure that this madness comes to an abrupt halt. What that looks like is going to be argued over time, and it's going to vary from person to person, but now that the nation is on the precipice of the abyss, every single effort must be made. It must be made to bring us back from the brink. And that is exactly what we're going to do. I think that we're all going to use, or we all should be using our skills to better civilization, to better humanity. And what that looks like, again, is going to be argued, right? We're going to argue about what are the best solutions for this, what are the best ways to fix some of these issues. All right, we can do that. And we're going to be doing that over the next few days and weeks and months. But right now, we can take some time to reflect, take some time to think about it, take some time to think about what you can do to help stop this madness, to help bring a sense of honor and decorum to a place where there is no peace, right? I'm not going to say everybody's going to hold hands and sing songs right over this, and I'm not saying that's the solution either. I'm just saying that there are a lot of ways to improve the situation around us. It's a very vague and broad statement, but I mean for it to be. There are ways to improve the world around us. There are. And we have gotten sloppy, we have gotten lazy, and we have every opportunity and every chance and every obligation to do what we can to do better. Think of this in the gym. Think of this when you're out and about in society. Think of this when you're talking to family and when you're at your job. Think about what you can do to do better. If you don't know how to fix the world, you can absolutely fix yourself, right? You can work on self-improvement any time of day. You can make better decisions regarding your own health. You can decide to get more fit, and you can make better decisions regarding your spiritual health too. I've seen a lot of people over the past few days who say that they haven't been to church in a long time, but they're going to go this Sunday. And I think that's just a fantastic thing. So we should always encourage people to find the truth and to keep searching for the truth until they find it. And I think that's probably a good way to move forward on a positive note. So that's all I have for today, everyone. And we'll get back to it next week. We'll think about it some more, and we'll do what we can to do better. So thank you guys all for your support. Keep praying about the situation. That always helps every single time. And we will see you on Monday. And as always, fight in the shade.